Hey guys, Vazzy back here, and in today's video we are going over my complete franchise mode wish list here for future NHL titles. I can already tell you this is going to be the longest voiceover video that I have ever done on this channel. I have something like 25 different items that I want to go over here today, so definitely give this video a like. It's going to take a long time to put all this stuff together, go through all the different games, and give examples of how I can see different events working in franchise mode. And I have a couple of things here I want to say just before we get into the video. The biggest one is I do not expect to see more or less any of these features actually added to franchise mode. So don't come at me at the comments saying that, oh yeah, we're getting the AllStar Game, we're getting outdoor games back, whatever, all this stuff. It's likely not going to happen. This is just a wish list. And secondly, if you have watched this channel over the past couple of years, there are going to be some repeats. I did 2 wish list videos on this channel last year, and I have done multiple different videos of how events can work in franchise mode. This video is basically a combination of everything, so there might be some repetition when it comes to certain events. But with that all being said, let's start the video and get into my wish list for NHL games. First off is the addition of LTIR into franchise mode. This is probably one of the biggest essential features that is missing from franchise mode at time of recording. As you look at this screenshot here from Cap Friendly, look at all the teams that have LTIR players. You have the Leafs with 5, Tampa with 4, Vegas with 5, you have Montreal again with 5, multiple teams with 4. And currently, when you load into franchise mode, there is no way to deal with this, and this ends up messing up salaries a ton when you start franchise. So looking at the Avalanche here, you'll see that now that Gabriel Landeskog is back on the roster, this is EA's default, everyone is completely messed up, and even before they were really messed up. Then going to Vegas, it's even worse. Eichel's supposed to be a $10 million player, he's making 8.875. So that's just giving whoever's using Vegas, either it be yourself or the computer, a huge advantage, what really shouldn't be in the game at all. I think a way they could look to rectify this issue is, I don't really know how they would do it when starting a franchise mode if a team's really over, but once you're in franchise mode itself, if a player gets hurt, I think you do have the option to put them on the LTIR, just like more or less a non-roster spot, and then you're just literally not able to bring that player back to your roster until you can clear that money, or it'd be playoffs, whatever it may be. So it's basically they're just stuck on a non-roster spot until you have the funds available to bring them back. I think something like that could work. It's pretty simple for the most part. Again, when starting a franchise mode, I don't even know how you would address the LTIR there. Maybe you just already have that player assigned to the non-roster spot and you just can't add them to the roster until then. I'm not too sure, that's a question for EA, but it definitely has to be added into one of these featured games here very, very soon. Next up is the addition of suspensions into franchise mode. This one is pretty straightforward for the most part. As of recording this, Matt Rempe of the Rangers has just been suspended 4 games for elbowing Siegenthaler on the Devils. So I think more or less just in franchise mode, if your player does get a game misconduct, there's more or less a 50-50 chance of that player being suspended. Again, this is being a video game, and a lot of the time we're just simming through things, so you don't really see everything necessarily. But I say, let's say it is one of that 50% chance where your guy does get suspended. It's anywhere between a 1 and 5 game suspension. I think you don't want to be having players suspended 20 games just for like some boarding call that you never even saw in a game that you simmed. So I would probably have the limit set at 5 games, and it's just total random 1 to 5 if your player is suspended. I think something like that could work. Again, up to EA, you just throw them on a non-roster spot during that time, and then they can come back after they've served their suspension. Next up is the addition of 3-team trades into franchise mode. This I will start out by saying could be a little bit more difficult to add, but if we are trying to replicate real life as best as possible in these games, we definitely have to be able to have 3-rate trades. So currently you can't do that like in-game. You have to go and make 2 separate trades with 2 teams, which again isn't the end of the world. But in the real world, we do see these trades all the time. Looking at this past trade deadline, you had the Lyubushkin trade, you had the Henrique trade, you had the Hanifin trade, and a lot of the time it is just done so that 2 teams can retain on a player so they can fit under the salary cap. It also gives another use of, if you have a lot of cap space, you can weaponize it, you can get some late round picks for doing that extra retention. So again, I don't really know how they would add it, that's a question for EA, but it is definitely something I want to see added into the game. Up next is bringing back the AllStar Game. So this is one that I have talked about quite a bit. Going back to these old NHL games, which I've been doing recently, they did have the AllStar Game in these older titles. Basically, when you get to the All-Star Game period, whenever that is, late January, February, there's the 2 All-Star Game teams in-game already created, and every team had 1 random player assigned. I believe it was just more or less whoever had the most points on your team just became an All-Star. Sometimes you'd have 2 depending on where your players sat in league standings, but this was a really good way of doing it. It's simple. Currently, maybe you just have it 4 divisional teams and each team gets to assign that player. I don't know, but I could actually see this coming back in the next couple of years potentially. So from the All-Star Game to the All-Star Skills Competition. So this is one that we've never actually seen implemented into franchise mode itself, although we kind of had these mini games in the game in prior years. So this is NHL 14. We had different competitions like what I'm doing now, the skating competition. I believe we had the hardest shot. We have the shooting accuracy challenge. Again, none of this was actually in franchise mode. I believe it's just practice mode. But it would be something that'd be really cool, like maybe the day before the All-Star Game. You have various different activities, and then maybe you just get a menu. You could pick anyone that's been selected from the All-Star teams already, and you could just go and play these different competitions with them and battle out against the AI. Next up is bringing back the outdoor games. So again, this is more or less what I was referring to. If you watch my channel, I bring this up all the time, especially going back to the older games. This was such a cool feature to have. They actually did a very, very good job on it. This is from what, 2013-14, whenever they were making it? So if they have the technology to make something this cool back then, why can't we see that in current generations of NHL games? I think it would be cool to have, I don't know, maybe 2 teams randomly selected as a host. I'm just asking for generic templates. I'm not asking for every single baseball stadium or hockey stadium to be added in. But then, yeah, you just get 2 random teams selected, you have your opponent, and then you have a couple of outdoor games in franchise mode itself. Again, if we're trying to make this more realistic, this is something that we've seen for the past, I don't know, 10 years or so. There's multiple outdoor games each and every year, and they're always a ton of fun. So I'm really, really hoping that they bring this back very, very soon. Next is the World Juniors and the IIHF tournaments. So this is something that we kind of already have in the game. We have it in the menus. You can do it offline, just outside of franchise mode. But the way I'm suggesting bringing it into franchise mode is maybe not what most people are expecting. So if you have a younger guy, let's just say I'm Chicago and I have Connor Bedard. When it gets closer to the World Junior team, I am prompted with this screen. I made this as just a mock-up last year. It's more or less roster management. Connor Bedard has been selected to Team Canada. If you accept this loan, he will be unavailable to January 14th. Again, the dates, everything can change. You can accept the player loan, you can decline it. And then again, that player would more or less just go on a non-roster spot until the tournament's conclusion, when they would return to your lineup. Again, I'm not asking for the whole mode to actually be added to franchise mode. Like, I don't need to be playing games with Team Canada in the middle of franchise mode. But I think it would be cool just to really show the existence of the World Juniors and even the IIHF World Hockey Tournament Championships, whatever they're called, into franchise mode. Up next is the addition of the ECHL. So this one is a quick one again, as I know why more or less it's not implemented in the mode currently, but I think it would be really cool just to have another league just for developmental players. Again, I think for the most part this isn't in because every NHL team doesn't currently have an ECHL team. I know they are expanding here, I want to say next year I heard, so maybe that's an issue that can be resolved. But I would love to have another league just to send my players if they're not ready for the AHL and they don't need to be sent back to juniors or whatever it may be. I think the ECHL would be a cool league to send players to gain a little bit more experience before getting called up. Next up is bringing back the GM tracker. So again, this is something that we had back in the older games, and I honestly thought it would be brought back when we got the record book a couple years ago. This more or less showed everything going on with your GM. You could see all the different awards, you could see the makeup of your roster, it shows you how many player type you have, your AHL, your NHL, your top offensive players, top defensive players. This was really cool, just another way to help manage your team. All the different tasks you had in the season, your GM reputation. This was really cool. Like over the years, if I could repair that relationship with Florida, that would be awesome to make better trades with them. Of course, it would take a couple of seasons, but it would be cool to see. I believe your record book was here when you get more stats. You have your contracts, you can see where you've been, how long you've been there, and then you had your staff abilities, which you could upgrade to help players avoid injury, I believe, and come back sooner from injury. Currently in NHL 24, the closest thing we more or less have to our record book, at least when it comes to seeing stats, is just the head coaches in game. You can kind of use that as a record book yourself, as it shows the team record and all that stuff. But a lot of the time you want to switch head coaches, fire a guy, bring in a new guy, and then you don't see the combined stats for both of them. The next item is generated player faces. So this is something that I hear a decent amount about at the start of the game for the most part, but then it kind of dies down the later on to the game we get. And that is that all these players more or less here have the gray silhouette in the draft. Obviously, the later you get into franchise mode is the more you're going to see this. I hear a lot of people saying in the draft, oh yeah, I'm going to draft this guy just because they have a real life face. But I think if we took the approach that MLB does, it would just be better the longer you get into franchise mode. They just go and generate a random, more or less, player profile, and that just gets shown as their face. Again, we already have these player faces. If you go into edit player, you can see what the guy looks like. It doesn't show you that from the menu. So that's a very small change, but I think it would be cool to see added. And I don't know how hard it would be. You already have the generated faces with coaches, so maybe it's something we see down the line. Moving on, we have the addition of real coaches into franchise mode. So currently in-game, you will see that all these coaches here, this is actually our Calgary Flames franchise mode. All these coaches, unfortunately, are just totally generated and are completely fake. You will see here they do have the generated picture, which is nice, but it would be cool to see some real-life NHL coaches in-game. I would love to have the ability to just go out and hire a John Tortorella, a John Cooper. You can go down the list. I don't know, I'm assuming it's a rights issue, but if we have all the players, everything in game, is it going to really be that much more expensive just to get 32 coaches? Again, I don't know. It might be, but it would be really cool to see. And just a quick example of this is Madden 23, I believe. We have the Pete Carrolls, you have the Josh McDaniels. I have Mike Tomlin here coming up. So they obviously can do it in these EA games. They obviously have the rights to these coaches, so why can't we get this going forward in NHL? Again, maybe it's something we see down the line, who knows. Next up is Hall of Fame inductees. So this one again is going to be more or less pretty to the point. I know a few other games do have this already in-game. NBA 2K I know has it. MLB The Show I definitely know had it at one point. I'm pretty sure they still do. But at the end of a player's career, if they have scored enough points, maybe you have it that they have to reach a certain amount of points, goals, assists, wins, whatever you may have. If they end up getting to that certain number, they end up making the Hall of Fame. I think that would be a very cool way of doing things. And really, you don't need a huge cutscene, obviously, putting someone into the Hall of Fame, but something just like this, like a pop-up screen like in NBA 2K, showing that the player has been inducted. Next up, we have the Stanley Cup banner raising. This again will probably be one of the shorter entries on the list. Apparently we had this in years past. I don't actually remember that myself. So if you know what games those are from, definitely let me know and I'll have to go check it out. But it would be so cool if your team wins the Stanley Cup in franchise mode. You just put all this time together, putting together a perfect squad. They went on a run and won the cup. That the opening day of the next season, you just get a very short cutscene showing the banner going up, maybe showing some of the players skating around, acknowledging it. I think it would be very, very cool to see. Again, Very small feature, but it would go a long way. And really, if you look at it, they're really trying to add to the presentation over the last couple of years with the glow sticks, the introductions, everything like that. I could definitely see something like this maybe coming in a future game. From going to Stanley Cup banner raisings to jersey retirement banner raisings. So I kind of wanted to group those two items together, but they are somewhat different. I think once a guy is retired on your franchise mode, I think there should be a pop-up. Again, I don't really know how you can control it if people are just trying to do this with every player that retires, but I think you should have the option of when a player retires, you can retire that number. Again, we do have retired numbers in game. You can't actually do them yourself. They're just retired numbers around the NHL currently. But I think it would be cool to just have the option, be like, yeah, I don't want on Tampa here, I don't want anyone wearing 26. I don't want on Vancouver 22 or 33 being worn again, kind of thing. And then maybe just like the Stanley Cup banner celebration, just a very quick cutscene on that night with the banners getting raised to the Raptors. Next, we have the Free Agent Frenzy minigame. So not too long ago, I actually put out a whole video dedicated just to this topic. Went over almost 10 minutes, which is kind of crazy. But I would love to see this actually added into franchise mode, and there is a number of ways you could go about doing it. So you could go back to my video and watch what I had to say there. This is a different idea of just making it a little bit easier. I say go into July 1st, you have your whole free agent list, everything like that, and you have a 2-hour countdown from, let's just say 10 to 12. So more or less just like the trade deadline. You can approach these players, you can see the interest just like in the top right corner there, if they are going to be signing with your team, if they're interested in that at all, and then you can start making offers. So basically after 12 o'clock starts on July 1st, players will randomly just start signing depending on the offers they are getting. They'll just be off the board, and then you would have to pivot to another player. Again, it is totally random, but I think it could be a lot of fun being in franchise mode. I gotta say, currently it is pretty boring. Literally every single free agency, you know players are gonna start signing by the 5th. If they're a bigger name, they'll probably take an extra day. It's the exact same formula that we've seen for quite a long time. I think it'd be cool to shake it up a bit. Up next is the ability to view lines in the off-season. So the suggestion is actually from an earlier video I did not too long ago here on the channel, and that is that I would love to have the ability to see my lines in the off-season. Just gives me more of a depth chart of seeing what I need to have for my team. Currently, I just have a side notepad app on my phone where I write down all the lineups of everything I need and need to make trades or sign for in the off-season. This is something that just gives us the ability to have a lineup and have unfilled spots. As long as the season's not going on, that shouldn't matter at all. And really, you could pair this with the Free Agent Frenzy minigame and just have the ability to view those lines, see your depth chart during the minigame itself. Next is the ability to move draft picks outside of franchise mode. So for me, being a rostered editor, this is a huge one which I need to see added into the game. So currently, unfortunately, there is no way to actually move around draft picks when it comes to players being traded. So again, going to the Vegas Golden Knights here, obviously Hurdle was just traded from San Jose. A first round pick was going back. There is no way, unfortunately, for me to replicate this currently in game. The only way of doing that would be having to merge rosters with EA's trade deadline roster that they just recently put out. But then I would have to go and reassign every single created player that I have put in game, plus the whole new rating system that I had made would all have to be redone, as it would just go back to EA's default ratings. So for someone like me, being able to move around draft picks would be huge. It would just make the rosters way more accurate for you guys, the community that I'm trying to bring these to. So next up, we have the addition of a live world in franchise mode. So you may be asking, what do you mean by a live world? And for me, that just means that players in free agency, if they are not given contracts by their NHL teams, they can go to Europe, and then if they perform well, they can come back and sign the next season. For me, the perfect example of that, and the guy that I think of the most for whatever reason, is Puis Suter. He was a guy that was in Switzerland for quite a while, was never drafted, I don't think. Chicago took a shot on him and he ended up becoming a decent, top 9 NHL player for the most part. But just looking at free agency here for an example, so like Dylan Coghlan didn't get an offer. He is a free agent at the start of the NHL season. So a guy like him, let's just say he could go and sign in the SHL or something. He goes, let's see, maybe he puts up a good amount of points, whatever it may be. Then the next season he can come back and sign with an NHL team, or he can remain in Europe. I think it would be cool to see, and it would just add more depth and would really feel like there's more leagues currently out there than just the NHL. Next, we have NHL Expansion over multiple years. So basically now, when starting a franchise, you only really have 2 options if you want to go the route of expansion. You have the 33-team expansion that you can do. It will just add 1 team throughout the mode, and then the league is more or less set as it is. I believe you can still relocate your team, whatever, but you're never going to get more than the 33 teams in-game. The only other way to get more teams in-game is by doing custom leagues. That way you can go all the way up to, I believe, 48 teams, which is awesome. I love that idea, and I loved that addition a couple of years ago. But I want to start a franchise mode where I have the 33rd team, and then over like every 2 years you get another expansion team added until you get to 36 total teams. If you look at the NHL just in general right now, it looks like we are on the verge of adding a 33rd team, whether it be Salt Lake, whether it be Atlanta or Houston. More teams are coming, and they're not all going to be added at once, so it would be cool to see some way of having them come in every couple of years, do a draft, and then that new team enters the league. Up next, we have the introduction of Aros Mode into franchise mode. So Aros Mode, I believe, is a 2K exclusive at the moment. You have 3 or 4 different eras depending on each game that you can start in. This is super cool, so you could go and do retro throwback eras like the Jordan era, the Kobe era. It'd be awesome to see something like this in NHL. I know Snipe and Score, he does fantastic work on all his retro NHL rosters and everything like that. They are very, very cool and very, very, very well done. But even so, he can't add in the things of like expansion happening over the course of some amount of years. Whereas in NBA, you'll just see those teams start appearing at the appropriate years. So Aros Mode would be awesome to see in combination with Snipe and Score's rosters. Up next, we have the introduction of the draft lottery cutscene. So again, this is something that is an NBA 2K exclusive, I believe, at the moment. I honestly couldn't even believe this when I first saw this a couple of years ago. This is the exact same clip I took from my wish list last year, but they have an actual draft lottery cutscene to show what pick and what player you're more or less going to get. That to me is just absolutely insane. Currently, we just have an NHL just on a random date, 2 or 3 days before the draft order pops up. A lot of YouTubers and stuff like to make it dramatic and cover it up. So this would just be a really cool way just for everyone just to get more immersed and see where your draft pick will be. Next item here today is the addition of more vintage logos to create a team. So again, for myself being a roster editor, this is something that I would love to see added into the creation suite and then in turn franchise mode itself. So currently we do have a decent amount of retro logos in the games. If you have downloaded my roster, you know that I have a ton of them already made up in game. The issue is, especially when it comes to the most recent reverse retro jerseys, those logos currently aren't available to be used. A lot of the time I was thinking that, oh, it's a licensing issue, EA, whatever reason, can't get it in there. But since we have the reverse retro jerseys in-game, that doesn't make a ton of sense to me. They're already on the jerseys of the teams with the new reverse retros, but if I wanted to create like a new Tampa Bay Lightning team, for an example, I could not use that old logo on the new team. So again, a very small feature, but is something I'd like to see updated going into future games. And the last item here on today's wish list, no movement / no trade clauses. This again is something that very, very commonly in the NHL we see nowadays. This is just the top players for the Detroit Red Wings when it comes to forwards. All but 2 of them have no movement or no trade clauses. This is something that I don't really know why we haven't seen in game. I guess it might be a little bit complex to add. But again, if we're trying to simulate reality, we have to have them in there. A way in the past I have brought up to do this is instead of having a no trade clause consist of a certain amount of teams that the player would choose, I would just have it based off standings. So if you offered a player a 10-team no trade clause, instead of having select teams that he wouldn't be able to go to, I would just say the bottom 10 teams from that previous year are teams he would not be eligible to go to. And then if you went and brought him up in the trade screen, it would just give you an X saying this player is not eligible to be traded here. I think doing something like that would just be super cool and would just add that much more depth to franchise mode. Currently, no movement clauses are only really in for the expansion draft. So again, I think they can definitely be expanded on so that we can actually use them and control them ourselves. But I think overall that is going to do it for everything I want to see come to the EA NHL franchise at some point. Again, just like at the start of the video, I do not expect any of this stuff anytime soon. If we even got one or two of those things, I would probably consider that a win in my books. Again, if you did like this video, make sure you give it a like. This video took forever to make compared to a lot of my videos, so would be greatly appreciated. Also, down in the comments below, if you guys have any features that I didn't mention here today, definitely let me know and maybe we can do a part 2 at some point. But until then, I'll see you all in the next video.